The last bus of the night pulled away, and Ava Thompson stood frozen on the empty street, clutching her sleeping infant son against the bitter cold. She had $17 left to her name and barely enough formula to last the week. Walking past the dimly lit bus shelter, she heard a sound so faint she almost missed it, a broken whimper cutting through the freezing night. When Ava turned around and saw the elderly couple trembling in the cold, abandoned and terrified, she made a decision that would cost her everything. What she didn't know was that helping two strangers would pull her into a dangerous fight against a manipulative son who would stop at nothing to silence her. And before it was all over, Ava would learn that sometimes the greatest courage is refusing to walk away when someone desperately needs saving. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The November wind sliced through the empty streets like broken glass. Ava Thompson pulled her thin jacket tighter around her body, clutching 2-month-old Micah against her chest. The baby was mercifully asleep, his tiny face barely visible beneath the worn blanket she'd wrapped around him 3 times. Her feet ached from the double shift at County General Hospital, where she spent 8 hours mopping floors and scrubbing toilets that never seemed to get clean no matter how hard she worked. She'd been running late from the locker room, fumbling with her time card while trying to keep Micah from waking. By the time she burst through the hospital's side exit, she saw the number 47 bus pulling away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the darkness. Ava wanted to scream. That was the last bus of the night. Now, she'd have to walk the 2 miles home through neighborhoods that got worse the farther you traveled from the hospital district. "It's okay, baby," she whispered to Micah, though he couldn't hear her. "Mama's got you." The truth was, Ava wasn't sure she had anything anymore. 3 months ago, her boyfriend Marcus had walked out the day she told him she was pregnant. He'd looked at her like she'd just announced a death sentence, packed a bag, and left without even closing the apartment door behind him. She'd stood there for 20 minutes, staring at that open doorway, waiting for him to come back and say he was sorry, that he'd panicked, that he'd stay. He never did. Now she had $17 in her wallet, $4 in her checking account, and half a can of formula at home. Her next paycheck wasn't for another 4 days. She'd been mentally calculating all evening whether she could stretch that formula if she watered it down just a little, even though she knew that was dangerous. The pediatrician at the free clinic had warned her about that. But what choice did she have? Ava passed the bus shelter on 12th Street without looking at it. She was too tired to look at anything except the cracked sidewalk beneath her feet. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. A whimper. No, more than that. A broken sob, muffled and desperate. She stopped walking. Her first instinct was to keep going. This neighborhood had its share of drunks and addicts who spent their nights at bus stops. Getting involved meant risking trouble she couldn't afford. But something about the sound made her chest tighten. It wasn't the cry of someone high or looking for a fight. It was the cry of someone terrified. Ava turned around slowly and walked back toward the shelter. The overhead light was flickering, casting strange shadows that made it hard to see clearly. She squinted into the darkness and saw 2 figures huddled together on the metal bench. An elderly white couple sat pressed against each other, as if they were trying to merge into one person. The woman was tiny and frail, her white hair escaping from a bun that had come mostly undone. She wore a cardigan, so thin Ava could see her floral dress underneath. Nokot. The man beside her was older, maybe early 80s, with deep lines carved into his face and liver spots covering his hands. He had his arm around the woman's shoulders, but he was shaking too. Both of them were shaking. "Mom," Ava called out softly, not wanting to startle them. "Sir, are you all right?" The woman's head snapped up, and Ava saw terror flash across her face. She grabbed the man's arm tighter. "It's okay," Ava said quickly, holding up one hand while keeping Micah secure with the other. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just heard you crying. Do you need help?" The man studied Ava for a long moment, his watery blue eyes moving from her face to the baby in her arms and back again. Something in his expression softened. He opened his mouth to speak, but his voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat and tried again. "We're We're waiting for our son." His wife let out a fresh sob and turned her face into his shoulder. "Walter, please," she whispered. "Please, we have to tell someone." "Eleanor, honey, he's coming back. He said he'd be right back. It's been 4 hours." Eleanor's voice broke on the last word. She looked up at Ava with eyes so full of desperation that Ava felt something twist inside her chest. "We don't know where he went. He said he was just running into the store. He told us to wait here. But that was so long ago, and our phones are dead, and we're so cold." Ava glanced at the corner. There was no store visible from here. The nearest one was 3 blocks away. Why would anyone tell elderly people to wait at a bus stop while running errands? "What's your son's name?" Ava asked, stepping closer. "Greg," Walter said. His voice was defensive now, protective. "Greg Hayes. He's a good boy. He probably got caught up with something. He'll be back." But Eleanor was shaking her head, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "We were supposed to go to the bank. He said we needed to sign some papers. But then he said we needed to stop here first. And then he drove away. He just drove away, Walter. He didn't drive away, Eleanor. He parked. He must have parked somewhere. Then where is he?" Eleanor's voice rose to a wail. "Why won't he answer his phone? Why won't he come back?" Ava looked down at Micah, still sleeping peacefully against her chest. She had $17. She needed that money. She needed every penny of it for formula, for diapers, for the electric bill that was already 2 weeks overdue. Getting involved with strangers meant complications she couldn't handle. It meant spending money she didn't have. It meant potentially missing work if things got messy. It meant risking everything for people she'd never see again. But Eleanor's hands are shaking so violently she couldn't clasp them together. And Walter was trying so hard to be strong, to be the protector, but Ava could see the fear underneath his brave face. She thought about her own grandmother, who died when Ava was 15. Nana had raised her after Ava's mother left. Nana would have helped these people without a second thought. Ava reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her wallet. Inside was a crumpled $20 bill, her emergency fund for emergencies she couldn't even imagine yet. She also had her spare bus pass, the one she'd bought last month, thinking she'd need it for backup. She pulled both out and walked closer to the couple. "Here," she said, holding them out. "Take these." Walter stared at the money and bus pass like they were written in a foreign language. No, we can't." "Please," Ava said. "It's freezing out here. Use the bus pass to get somewhere warm. Use the money for food or to charge your phones. Just please don't stay here." Eleanor reached out with trembling fingers and took the items. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much. We'll pay you back. I promise. What's your address?" "Don't worry about it," Ava said. She tried to smile, but it felt weak. "Just get somewhere safe." That's when she noticed Walter's forearm. His sleeve had ridden up when he'd moved, exposing pale, thin skin covered in bruises. Dark purple ones, yellowing at the edges. Some were small and round, like fingerprints. Ava had seen bruises like that before. On her own arms, 3 years ago, when Marcus had grabbed her during an argument about money. "Sir," Ava said carefully, "how did you get those bruises?" Walter's face went bright red. He yanked his sleeve down quickly, but not before Eleanor saw what Ava was looking at. Eleanor's face crumpled. "I fell," Walter said. His voice was too loud, too defensive. "I'm old. I fall sometimes." "Walter doesn't fall," Eleanor said softly, staring at her lap. "He's never fallen. Not once in 60 years. Eleanor, don't. He grabs your arm, doesn't he?" Eleanor continued, her voice hollow. "When you won't do what he wants. When you ask too many questions about the money. He grabs you, and he squeezes, and he tells you to shut up." The silence that followed was suffocating. Walter wouldn't look at either of them. Eleanor was crying again, silent tears that rolled down her face and dripped on her thin cardigan. Ava felt sick. "Your son did that. He's stressed," Walter said quickly. "The business isn't doing well. He's under a lot of pressure. He doesn't mean it. That's not an excuse. You don't understand. He's all we have. Our daughter lives in Seattle. We haven't seen her in years. Greg takes care of us. He handles everything. We'd be lost without him." Ava was about to respond when she noticed something else. A dark sedan was driving slowly down the street. Too slowly. It passed the bus stop, and Ava saw the driver's face turn toward them. And the car kept going. 30 seconds later, it came back from the other direction, even slower this time. Eleanor noticed it too. She made a small sound of fear and grabbed Walter's coat. That's his car. That's Greg's car. Are you sure? I'm sure. Oh God, he's checking on us. He's making sure we're still here. Walter's face went pale. Why would he do that? I don't know. Eleanor sobbed. I don't know anything anymore. The car drove past a third time, and this time it slowed almost to a stop. Ava couldn't see the driver clearly, but she could feel eyes on them. Watching. Calculating. Then the car sped up and disappeared around the corner. Ava's heart was pounding. Something was very wrong here. This wasn't just an old couple whose son forgot about them. This was something darker. Something dangerous. You're not staying here, Ava said firmly. Come with me. We can't impose, Walter started. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. You can't sit here all night waiting for someone who might not come back. And if he does come back, I don't think you should go with him. Not tonight. Not until we figure out what's happening. But where would we go? Ava looked down at Micah, looked at her empty wallet, looked at these two frightened people who reminded her so much of her Nana. Then she made a decision that she knew would probably ruin her life, but that she could not make. My apartment. It's small, but it's warm. You can stay there tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Eleanor started crying harder, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from relief. Walter's eyes filled with tears, too. He tried to speak, but couldn't form words. Finally, he just nodded. Ava pulled out her phone and called her co-worker Shanice, who was just getting off shift. While it rang, Ava kept watching the street, waiting for that sedan to return. The phone rang 4 times before Shanice picked up. Girl, you better have a good reason for calling me at 11:30 at night. Shanice, I need a favor. A big one. Can you give me and 2 other people a ride to my apartment? We're at the bus stop on 12th. 2 other people? Ava, what are you into? I'll explain in the car. Please. It's freezing out here, and I have Micah with me. Shanice sighed loudly. You're lucky I like you. I'll be there in 10 minutes. While they waited, Ava tried to make small talk to keep Eleanor calm. She asked about their lives, their marriage, how they'd met. Eleanor's face lit up when she talked about falling in love with Walter at a church social in 1963. Walter added details, and for a few minutes, they seemed almost normal, almost happy. Then Eleanor said something that made Ava's blood run cold. Greg came to the hospital earlier, didn't he? Ava frowned. What? He told us he had to stop by the hospital to pick something up. Medical records, he said, but he was acting strange, angry. He was on his phone arguing with someone. Before Ava could process that, her phone buzzed with a text from Shanice. I'm here. But girl, there's something you should know. Ava saw Shanice's car pull up, and she helped Walter and Eleanor stand. They moved slowly, painfully. When they reached the car, Shanice was staring at them with wide eyes. Get in, Shanice said. We need to talk. Now. Once everyone was inside and the heat was blasting, Shanice turned around in her seat and looked directly at Eleanor and Walter. You're the Hayes couple, aren't you? They both froze. How do you know that? Walter asked. Because your son came to the hospital 3 hours ago, causing a scene. He was screaming at security that his parents had wandered off and that the hospital staff was negligent. He accused us of letting senile patients escape. Eleanor gasped. We weren't at the hospital. We were never at the hospital. I know, Shanice said grimly. We told him that. But he insisted you'd been there for an appointment. He had everyone searching the building. He filed a complaint. He threatened to sue. Ava felt like she'd been punched. He lied. He lied to the hospital staff to cover up the fact that he'd abandoned his parents. That's what I'm thinking, Shanice said. And that means whatever's going on here is way more serious than an old couple getting lost. Walter's face was ashen. Why would Greg do that? But Eleanor knew. Ava could see it in her eyes. Eleanor knew exactly why. The ride to Ava's apartment felt longer than 2 miles. Eleanor and Walter sat in the back seat, mostly silent except for Walter's occasional reassurances to his wife. Ava held Micah, watching streetlights pass by outside the window, her mind racing through everything that had happened. Shanice kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, her expression a mixture of concern and something that looked almost like admiration. When they pulled up in front of Ava's building, Walter's face fell. The three-story structure was old and crumbling, with cracked concrete steps leading to a front door that didn't close properly. Graffiti covered the ground floor walls, and two of the exterior lights were burned out. Ava felt a flush of shame. This was her home, but she knew what it looked like to people who didn't live here. It looked dangerous. It looked like the kind of place where bad things happened. "It's safer than it looks," Ava said quietly. "Most of the people here are just trying to get by, like me." "Honey, we're not judging," Eleanor said quickly. "We're just grateful. You have no idea how grateful we are." Shanice helped them out of the car. "You need me to come up?" she asked Ava. "No, I've got it. But thank you. For everything." Shanice hugged her tight. "You call me if anything happens." "I mean it. Anything at all." Ava nodded and led Eleanor and Walter up the stairs. Her apartment was on the second floor, number 204, squeezed between two units that were always blasting music at odd hours. Her hand shook as she unlocked the door, suddenly aware of how small and shabby everything was. The living room and kitchen were basically one room, with a worn couch that Ava had found on the street corner 3 years ago and a folding table with two mismatched chairs. Her bedroom was barely big enough for a mattress on the floor and Micah's crib. The bathroom had mold in the corners she couldn't scrub away no matter how hard she tried. But it was warm, and it was safe, and right now that was enough. "Please sit down," Ava said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll make some tea. Are you hungry?" "I don't have much, but I have bread and some peanut butter." "Tea would be wonderful," Eleanor said. She sank onto the couch with a small sigh of relief. "We haven't eaten since breakfast. Greg said we'd get lunch after the bank, but then—" Her voice trailed off. Walter sat beside her and took her hand. Ava moved around the tiny kitchen, putting water in the kettle and setting it on the stove. Micah was starting to wake up, making small grunting sounds against her chest. She changed his diaper on the couch while the water heated, then made 2 cups of tea and brought them over. Eleanor took hers with shaking hands, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. That's when Micah fully woke up and started a fuss. Ava bounced him gently, trying to soothe him, but he was hungry. She could tell by the way he was rooting around, his tiny mouth searching. She'd have to make formula, which meant using up more of what little she had left. "May I?" Eleanor asked suddenly, reaching out. Ava hesitated. She didn't know these people. Not really, but something in Eleanor's face made her hand over the baby. Eleanor took Micah with practiced ease, cradling him close and making soft cooing sounds. Almost immediately, he quieted. Eleanor's entire face transformed. The fear and tension melted away, replaced by pure joy. "Oh, he's beautiful," Eleanor whispered. "Look at those eyes, Walter. Have you ever seen such beautiful eyes?" Walter leaned over to look at Micah and smiled. "My grandson had eyes like that, big and brown and curious about everything." "Ah," Ava asked, measuring formula carefully in the kitchen. "He's 14 now, lives in Portland with his mother. We haven't seen him in 2 years." "Greg is son." "Yes, Greg and his wife divorced when the boy was 8. She got full custody and moved across the country. Greg, he didn't take it well." Ava brought the bottle over and handed it to Eleanor, who fed Micah with the kind of gentle competence that only comes from years of experience. Watching her made Ava's chest ache. She'd never had help with Micah, never had someone to show her the right way to hold him, or feed him, or soothe him when he cried. She'd figured it all out alone, through trial and error and late nights, spent crying almost as much as her baby. "Eleanor," Ava said carefully, "can you tell me what's really going on? Why would Greg leave you at a bus stop?" Eleanor kept her eyes on Micah. She was quiet for so long that Ava thought she wouldn't answer. Then she started talking, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started about 6 months ago. Greg came to us and said he wanted to help with our finances. He said we were getting older and it was time to let him take over the bills and the paperwork. We thought it was sweet, thoughtful even. So we agreed. Walter took over. We signed some papers. Power of attorney, he said. Just standard stuff in case something happened to us. We trusted him. He's our son." Then things started changing, Eleanor continued. Money disappeared from our account. Not all at once. Little bits here and there. $20, $50. When I asked Greg about it, he said those were fees for managing everything. Bank fees. Processing fees. It made sense, so I didn't push. But then we got a notice, Walter said. His voice was getting louder, agitated. A foreclosure notice. On our house. The house we've lived in for 40 years. The house we paid off completely 10 years ago. Greg said there had been a mistake. He said he'd fix it, but the notices kept coming. We asked to see the paperwork, Eleanor said. Greg got angry, really angry. He said we didn't trust him. He said we were ungrateful. That's when he grabbed Walter's arm the first time. Ava felt sick. Did you try to get help? Who would we call? Walter asked bitterly. The police? They'd say it was a family matter. Our daughter? She stopped talking to Greg years ago. They had some kind of falling out she won't discuss. We're alone. Greg knows we're alone. Eleanor was crying again, tears dripping onto Micah's blanket. The baby had finished his bottle and was starting to doze off, completely unaware of the heavy conversation happening around him. There's more, Eleanor said. Last week, Greg told us we couldn't live in the house anymore. He said it was too much for us to maintain. He said he was moving us to a care facility. But when I asked which one, he wouldn't tell me. He wouldn't show me any brochures or information. He just said to trust him. That's when you hid the documents, Ava guessed. Eleanor's head snapped up. How did you know? Just a feeling. What documents? Papers. Important papers. Our marriage certificate, Walter's military discharge papers, old bank statements. I had a bad feeling, so I hid them behind a bookshelf in the living room, in a little hollow space where the wood's broken. Greg doesn't know about it. Ava's mind was spinning. This wasn't just elder abuse. This was calculated, systematic. Greg was isolating his parents, controlling their money, and possibly trying to steal their house. And when they'd started asking questions, he'd gotten violent. Tonight, leaving them at the bus stop might have been a test, or a warning, or maybe even something worse. You can't go back there, Ava said. Not until we figure this out. But where would we stay? Walter asked. We can't impose on you. You have a baby. You have your own problems. I don't care. You're staying here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. Before anyone could respond, there was a loud knock on the door. Not a normal knock. An aggressive pounding that made all three adults jump. Micah startled awake and started crying. Ava Thompson, a man's voice shouted from the hallway. I know you're in there. Open this door right now. Eleanor went white. That's Greg, she whispered. That's his voice. Ava's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She handed Micah to Eleanor and walked to the door, but she didn't open it. What do you want? She called through the wood. I want my parents. You have no right to kidnap them. They're not kidnapped. They're safe. Safe? You don't even know them. You're some random woman who's probably scamming them for money. I'm calling the police right now. Go ahead, Ava said, surprising herself with her own courage. Call them. I'd love to explain to the police why your elderly parents were abandoned at a bus stop in freezing weather. I didn't abandon them. They wandered off. I've been looking everywhere. That's not what they told me. There was a moment of silence. Then Greg's voice came back, lower and more dangerous. Who do you think you are? You think you're some kind of hero? Let me tell you something. Those people in there are my parents. Mine, not yours. You have no legal right to keep them from me. Ava glanced back at Eleanor and Walter. They were both trembling, holding each other and Micah like they were life rafts. They don't want to see you, Ava said. I don't care what they want. They're confused. They're old. They don't know what's best for them. I do. Now open this door before I break it down. Greg kicked the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Ava jumped back. She heard Eleanor sob. That's when Ava's hand went to her phone in her pocket. She pulled it out and hit record, holding it near the door so the microphone would catch everything. You need to leave, Ava said loudly and clearly, or I will call the police. Call them. They'll arrest you for kidnapping. For helping two people who were abandoned and needed assistance. They weren't abandoned, Greg roared. He kicked the door again. They're senile. They forget things. I'm their legal guardian. Actually, you're not, Walter called out from the couch. His voice was shaky but defiant. We never signed guardianship papers. Just power of attorney for finances. The hallway went quiet. Ava could almost hear Greg thinking on the other side of the door. Dad. Greg's voice changed. It became softer, almost pleading. Dad, it's me. Come on. Let's go home. Mom's tired. You're tired. This nice lady doesn't need to be bothered with us. We're not going with you, Eleanor said, her voice stronger than Ava had heard it all night. Not tonight, Greg. Not after what you did. What I did. I took care of you. I've been taking care of you for months. And this is how you thank me. You left us on the street, Walter said. You knew that bus stop. You knew there were no stores nearby. You left us there on purpose. Another long silence. When Greg spoke again, his voice was ice cold. Fine, stay there. But you're making a huge mistake. Both of you. And you, he said, clearly speaking to Ava now, you're going to regret sticking your nose in our family business. I promise you that. Ava heard footsteps walking away. Heavy, angry footsteps that echoed in the concrete stairwell. She stayed frozen by the door for a full minute, waiting to see if he'd come back. When she was sure he was gone, she turned off the recording and looked at Eleanor and Walter. I'm calling the police, she said. She dialed 911 and waited through 3 rings before a dispatcher answered. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Ava Thompson. I'm at 2447 Riverside, apartment 204. A man just threatened me and 2 elderly people I'm helping. He tried to force his way into my apartment. Is he still there? No, he just left. Ma'am, is this a domestic situation? No, it's complicated. These 2 elderly people were abandoned at a bus stop. I brought them here to help them. Their son showed up and tried to force them to leave. So this is a family dispute? Ava's heart sank. She could hear the dismissive tone in the dispatcher's voice. No, it's not a dispute. It's elder abuse. He's been stealing their money, and he left them in the cold. They're afraid of him. Ma'am, if the parents went with their son voluntarily, that's a family matter. We can't intervene in family matters unless there's evidence of immediate danger. There are bruises on the father's arm from where his son grabbed him. Are the parents willing to press charges? Ava looked at Walter and Eleanor. They were both shaking their heads. They looked terrified. I don't know. Then I'm afraid there's not much we can do. If the situation escalates, call us back. But right now, this sounds like a family disagreement that should be handled between family members. But the line went dead. The dispatcher had hung up on her. Ava stood in the middle of her tiny living room, phone in hand, feeling completely helpless. Through her apartment door, she could hear Greg's voice echoing up from the parking lot. He was on his phone now, talking to someone. Yeah, I found them. They're with some woman in a shithole apartment building. No, I couldn't get them out. She's got them convinced I'm a bad guy. Don't worry. I'll handle it. She'll regret this. I'll make sure of it. Then she heard a car door slam and an engine start. Greg drove away, but Ava knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't over. Not even close. She turned to Eleanor and Walter, who were watching her with frightened, grateful eyes. You're safe here tonight, Ava said, even though she wasn't sure she believed it. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. But right now you need rest. Eleanor was still holding Micah, rocking him gently. The baby had fallen back asleep, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. Thank you, Eleanor whispered. You saved our lives tonight. We'll never forget it. Ava just nodded. She made up the couch with spare blankets and pillows, gave them what little food she had, and showed them where everything was. Then she retreated to her bedroom with Micah and closed the door. Only then, in the darkness, did she let herself break down. She cried silently, her face buried in her pillow so Eleanor and Walter wouldn't hear. She'd just involved herself in something dangerous. She'd given away money she desperately needed. She'd made an enemy of someone who clearly had no problem hurting people. But when she looked at Micah sleeping peacefully in his crib, she knew she'd do it again. Because some things were more important than money or safety. Some things were worth fighting for, even when you knew you might lose. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. Ava pulled her thin blanket up to her chin and tried not to think about Greg's final words. Try not to think about what tomorrow would bring. But sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it finally did, Ava's dreams were filled with shadows and locked doors and the sound of someone pounding, pounding until everything shattered apart. The morning after Greg's threatening visit, Ava woke to find Eleanor already awake in the kitchen, trying to quietly wash the few dishes they'd used the night before. Sunlight filtered through the dirty window, highlighting just how exhausted the older woman looked. Her hands still trembled as she scrubbed a mug, and Ava noticed she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting Greg to burst through it any moment. "You don't have to do that," Ava said softly, not wanting to startle her. Eleanor jumped anyway, dropping the mug into the sink with a clatter. "Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to help. You've done so much for us. Please sit down. You need rest." They sat together at the small folding table while Micah dozed in his crib and Walter snored softly on the couch. Eleanor wrapped her hands around a cup of instant coffee, staring into it like she might find answers in the dark liquid. "I keep thinking about last night," Eleanor said, "about how Greg knew where we were, how he found us so quickly. He probably saw my co-worker's car when we left the bus stop," Ava suggested. "Or maybe he was watching the whole time." Eleanor shuddered. "That's what scares me, that he was watching, that he wanted us to be afraid." Ava reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "We're going to figure this out, but I'm going to need help. Do you know anyone who understands legal stuff? Anyone who might be able to look at what Greg's been doing?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "There's a woman down the hall from us, Mrs. Patel. She's a widow. She used to work in a law office doing filing and paperwork before she retired. She's helped us before with small things. Tax forms, insurance claims. She's very sharp. Do you think she'd help us now?" "I think she would. She never liked Greg. She told me once that he reminded her of her nephew, who stole from her sister's estate." An hour later, after everyone had eaten the last of Ava's bread and peanut butter, there was a gentle knock on the door. Ava checked through the peephole and saw a small Indian woman in her 70s, wearing a bright purple cardigan and holding a covered dish. "Mrs. Patel?" Ava called through the door. "Yes, dear. Eleanor called me. I brought food." Ava opened the door and Mrs. Patel bustled in, immediately taking charge of the situation in the way only certain grandmothers can. She set the dish on the counter, revealed it to be homemade samosas, and then pulled out a notepad and reading glasses from her enormous purse. "Now, then," Mrs. Patel said, sitting at the table and looking at Walter with sharp eyes. "Eleanor told me some of what's happening, but I need details. When did Greg first ask to handle your finances?" Walter rubbed his face tiredly. "March. Early March. He came over one Saturday and said he'd been talking to a financial advisor who said we should consolidate everything, make it easier to manage. And you signed papers?" "Yes. Power of attorney," he said. "I didn't read them as carefully as I should have." Walter's voice cracked with shame. "I trusted him. He's my son." "Of course you trusted him," Mrs. Patel said firmly. "That's what parents do." "What happened after you signed?" Eleanor took over the story. "Money started disappearing. Not a lot at first. Then more. When we asked about it, Greg said it was fees. Investment fees. Management fees. It seemed reasonable." "Did he show you statements?" "He said they were digital now, that everything was online and he'd handle it." Mrs. Patel made a note. "And the house? Tell me about the foreclosure." "We got a notice in August," Walter said. "So we were 3 months behind on mortgage payments. But we paid off that house in 2015. We have the papers proving it." "Do you have those papers now?" Walter and Eleanor exchanged glances. "They're hidden," Eleanor said. "At the house. Behind the bookshelf in the living room. There's a space where the wood panel is loose. I put everything important there about a month ago when I started getting suspicious." "What made you suspicious?" Mrs. Patel asked. "Greg came over one night, very late. He was drunk. He started talking about how the house was worth at least $400,000 now. How he could retire early if he was smart. Then he looked at me and said, 'Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you.' But the way he said it," Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "It didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a threat." Ava felt cold. "We need those papers." "You need more than papers," Mrs. Patel said. "You need a trail. Bank statements, property records, anything showing what Greg actually did with the house and the money." Ava pulled out her phone and opened the county assessor's website. She typed in the Hayes address and waited for the page to load. When it did, everyone crowded around to look at the screen. The house was listed under a company name, Hayes Property Holdings, LLC. The transfer date was July 15th. The original owner was listed as Walter and Eleanor Hayes. The new owner was the LLC. The sale price was listed as $1. $1, Walter said numbly. He bought our house for $1. He didn't buy it, Mrs. Patel said grimly. He transferred it. Probably told you it was some kind of estate planning. And I'm willing to bet that LLC is solely owned by Greg. Ava searched for Hayes Property Holdings and found it registered to Greg's name and business address. She clicked further and discovered something even worse. The house was listed for sale, $500,000, and there was an offer pending. He's selling it, Ava said. He's selling your house right now. Eleanor started crying. Walter just stared at the screen, his face gray. We have to get those papers, Mrs. Patel said. Today, before Greg moves forward with this sale. But he might be there, Eleanor said. What if he catches us? Then we wait until he's not there. Eleanor, what's Greg's work schedule? He owns a consulting business. He works from home most days. But on Thursdays, he always goes to the city for client meetings. He leaves around 9 in the morning and doesn't come back until evening. Ava checked her phone. It's Wednesday. We'll go tomorrow morning. I should come too, Mrs. Patel said. I know what to look for. And if we're questioned, it's harder to accuse 3 people of breaking and entering than 1. We're not breaking in, Walter said quietly. It's our house. We still live there legally. We're just retrieving our belongings. But his hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. They spent the rest of the day planning. Eleanor drew a detailed map of the house layout, marking where Greg spent most of his time, which doors creaked, where the security cameras were pointed. She described the bookshelf in detail, how to reach behind it without knocking over the collectible snow globes on the shelves. She even remembered that Greg kept a spare key hidden under a fake rock near the back porch. That night, nobody slept well. Ava lay awake listening to Micah breathe, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. This wasn't just helping someone in need anymore. This was actively working against a man who'd already proven he was dangerous. A man who knew where she lived. A man who'd promised she'd regret crossing him. But when she thought about Eleanor's terrified face at that bus stop, about Walter's bruises, about how easily Greg had manipulated the system to steal from his own parents, she knew she couldn't back down now. Thursday morning came cold and gray. Ava arranged for Shanice to watch Micah, telling her only that she had to run an important errand. Shanice looked skeptical, but agreed. At 8:30, Ava, Mrs. Patel, Eleanor, and Walter piled into Mrs. Patel's ancient Honda Civic and drove across town to the Hayes residence. The house was a modest ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood where every lawn was neatly trimmed and every driveway had an American flag. It looked peaceful, normal, nothing like the scene of a crime. They parked a block away and watched. At 9:15, Greg's black truck pulled out of the driveway. Eleanor ducked down instinctively, even though the windows were tinted. They waited 10 more minutes to be sure he wasn't coming back, then approached the house. Eleanor's hands shook so badly she couldn't retrieve the spare key from the fake rock. Walter had to do it, his jaw clenched with determination. The key turned smoothly in the back door lock. They stepped inside. The house smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink. Mail was scattered across the kitchen counter, most of it marked with red warnings. Past due. Final notice. Urgent response required. Eleanor picked up one envelope and gasped. This is addressed to me. He never gave it to me. Later, Mrs. Patel said, get the papers first. We need to be fast. They moved through the house quickly. The living room was exactly as Eleanor had described. A large oak bookshelf covered one wall, filled with books, photo albums, and collectible snow globes from every state Eleanor and Walter had visited during their 60 years together. Eleanor went straight to the third shelf from the bottom and carefully removed 3 snow globes. Behind them, the wood panel was slightly loose. Walter, help me, she whispered. Together, they pried the panel away just enough for Eleanor to reach her hand into the gap. Her fingers searched blindly for a moment, then closed around something. She pulled out a large manila envelope, dusty and slightly crushed but intact. "Got it," she breathed. Mrs. Patel took the envelope and opened it on the coffee table. Inside were bank statements going back 2 years, property deeds, insurance documents, and handwritten notes in Eleanor's shaky script documenting dates and conversations with Greg. There was also a letter Eleanor had written but never sent, dated 6 weeks ago, describing her fear that Greg was stealing from them. "This is good," Mrs. Patel said. "This is very good. But we need more. We need to see what else Greg has been hiding here." They spread out through the house. Ava went to what was clearly Greg's home office, a converted bedroom with a desk covered in paperwork and a computer with 3 monitors. She carefully photographed everything with her phone, including bank statements showing large withdrawals, emails to real estate agents, and a folder labeled Parents, Financial Planning that made her stomach turn. Inside the folder were documents outlining Greg's plan to have his parents declared mentally incompetent. There were notes from a lawyer discussing the process. There was even a draft letter to a psychiatric facility inquiring about long-term care costs. Walter found it first. He'd been searching through the bedroom that used to be his and Eleanor's, now clearly used by Greg for storage. In the back of the closet, behind boxes of old clothes, was a metal box. Not locked, just hidden. "Ava," Walter called out shakily. "Come look at this." The metal box contained investment account statements showing Walter's retirement funds had been transferred to Greg's personal account. There was a notarized document that looked legitimate but had a signature that definitely wasn't Walter's. There were receipts from a real estate attorney, notes about property transfers, and most damning of all, a handwritten timeline in Greg's own messy script. The timeline laid out everything. When he'd get power of attorney, when he'd transfer the house, when he'd liquidate their accounts, when he'd have them committed, when he'd sell everything and disappear. The final entry, dated for next month, simply said, "Freedom." Ava felt like she might be sick. This wasn't just financial abuse. This was a calculated plan to destroy his parents' lives for money. "We need to leave," Mrs. Patel said urgently from the hallway. "Now, I hear something." They all froze. Outside, a car door slammed. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. "The back," Eleanor whispered frantically. "Go out the back." They scrambled toward the kitchen, trying to move quietly but quickly. Ava shoved the metal box under her jacket. Mrs. Patel clutched the manila envelope. Walter and Eleanor held hands, moving as fast as their old bodies would allow. They heard the front door open just as they reached the back door. Greg's voice echoed through the house. "I know someone's been here. I know it." They slipped out the back door and ran across the yard, ducking behind the neighbor's tall fence. Ava's heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. They made their way along the back of several properties, staying low, until they reached the street where Mrs. Patel's car was parked. Just as they were climbing into the car, they heard Greg's roar of rage from his house. "Where are they? Where are my papers?" Mrs. Patel started the car and pulled away calmly, like they were just 4 people coming back from a pleasant morning drive. But nobody spoke. Nobody breathed normally. They didn't feel safe until they were back at Ava's apartment with the door locked and bolted. Only then did they open the metal box again and spread everything across Ava's floor. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank fraud, forged signatures, property theft, plans to falsely commit his parents. Everything they needed to prove what Greg had been doing. "We take this to the police now," Mrs. Patel said. "This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is criminal." But before they could move, Ava's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ava Thompson," a man's voice said. "Yes. This is Detective Richard Moss with the county police. I need to talk to you about a complaint that's been filed against you." Ava's blood ran cold. "What kind of complaint?" "Mr. Greg Hayes has accused you of elder abuse, kidnapping, and theft. He says you're holding his parents against their will and have stolen valuable documents from his home. I'm going to need you to come down to the station." Ava looked at Eleanor and Walter, who had both gone pale. This was exactly what Greg had promised. He was going to bury her using the very system that should have protected his parents. "Detective," Ava said carefully, "I think you need to hear the whole story." "I'm sure I do, Miss Thompson. So come down to the station. Today." or I'll have to send officers to bring you in." He hung up before she could respond. The next 48 hours became a nightmare that Ava couldn't wake up from. The police interview had been brutal. Detective Moss listened to her story with a skeptical expression, taking notes but clearly unconvinced. Even when Mrs. Patel showed him the documents they'd retrieved, even when Eleanor tearfully described being abandoned at the bus stop, the detective's face remained neutral. "This is a complex family situation," he'd said. "These kinds of financial disputes need to be handled through civil court, not criminal charges." As for the abandonment claim, Mr. Hayes says his parents have been experiencing memory problems and wandered away from him. He was searching for them when Ms. Thompson allegedly took them. "That's a lie," Ava had said. "I have a recording of him threatening us through my apartment door. Family arguments get heated. That doesn't prove abuse." In the end, the detective said he'd investigate but suggested Ava stay out of it. Let the family work things out. Stop inserting herself where she didn't belong. Walking out of that police station, Ava had felt utterly defeated. The system wasn't going to help. They were on their own. But Greg wasn't done. Not even close. 2 days after the police interview, Ava got a call from County General Hospital. She was being terminated effective immediately. The Human Resources Director was apologetic but firm. An anonymous complaint had been filed claiming Ava stole medication from the pharmacy. Security footage was being reviewed. Until the investigation was complete, she couldn't work there. "I never stole anything," Ava said, her voice shaking. "I would never." "I understand, Miss Thompson, but we have to take these accusations seriously. If you're cleared, we'll discuss reinstatement." But Ava knew she wouldn't be cleared. Greg had somehow filed a false report, and even if she proved her innocence eventually, it would take weeks or months. She needed that paycheck now. She needed it to feed Micah, to pay rent, to survive. She hung up and sat on her couch, staring at nothing. Eleanor came and sat beside her, taking her hand. "This is my fault," Eleanor said. "We should never have involved you." "No," Ava said firmly. "Greg did this. Not you. Not me. Greg." But knowing that didn't change her reality. She had $53 in her bank account. Rent was due in a week. She had no job and no prospects. And she had a 2-month-old baby depending on her. The stress was affecting everyone. Walter's chest pains had gotten worse. One night, he woke gasping for air, clutching at his ribs. Ava called 911 and rode with him in the ambulance while Eleanor and Mrs. Patel followed in Mrs. Patel's car. At the emergency room, a doctor examined Walter and delivered bad news. "Mr. Hayes, you're experiencing symptoms of stress-induced cardiac distress. Your heart is under tremendous strain. If this continues, you could have a serious heart attack. You need to remove yourself from whatever situation is causing this stress." Walter had looked at the doctor with hollow eyes. "I can't remove myself from my own son." The doctor prescribed medication and rest, but everyone knew that wouldn't solve anything. Then, 3 days after Walter's hospital visit, there was a knock on Ava's door. She looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a business suit holding a clipboard. "Ms. Thompson, I'm Karen Bellamy with Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about your son." Ava's hands went numb as she opened the door. "What about my son?" "We received a complaint that you're endangering your child by allowing unstable individuals to live in your home. I need to do a home inspection and ask you some questions." Ava let her in, her mind racing. Greg had called CPS. Of course he had. He was systematically destroying every part of her life. Karen Bellamy walked through the small apartment, making notes. She looked in the refrigerator, nearly empty now. She checked Micah's crib, clean but shabby. She asked about Eleanor and Walter, who were hiding in Ava's bedroom, terrified. "Miss Thompson, I see you recently lost your job. I was falsely accused. I'm fighting it. And these elderly individuals living here, what's your relationship to them?" "I'm helping them. Their son was abusing them." "Has that been proven?" "We have evidence. We took it to the police." "But no charges have been filed?" Ava felt trapped. "Not yet." Karen wrote more notes. She asked about Ava's income, her childcare arrangements, her support system. Every answer made Ava sound more desperate, more unstable, exactly how Greg wanted her to look. But then Karen asked to speak to Eleanor and Walter. Ava led her to the bedroom, where the elderly couple sat on the edge of the bed, looking terrified. "Mrs. Hayes," Karen said gently, "I need to understand what's happening here. Are you being held against your will?" "No," Eleanor said immediately. "No, Ava saved us. She saved our lives. Can you explain?" Eleanor took a shaky breath, and then the whole story poured out. Everything. The abandonment, the financial abuse, the bruises, the fear. Walter added details, showing his forearm where the bruises had started to yellow but were still visible. They showed Karen the documents they'd retrieved, pointing out forged signatures and stolen money. By the time they finished, Karen's expression had changed completely. She looked at Ava with something that might have been respect. "Miss Thompson, I want you to know that I don't see any evidence of child endangerment here. Your apartment is clean. Your son is well cared for. And these people clearly need help." She paused. "But I have to file a report. And that report is going to say that while I found no evidence to support the complaint, your living situation is precarious. You need income. You need stability. If things don't improve, there could be follow-up visits." After Karen left, Ava sat on the floor and cried. She cried for the first time since the night Greg had pounded on her door. She cried until she had no tears left, until her body was just going through the motions of sobbing without any sound coming out. Eleanor held her. This woman she'd known for less than a week held her and rocked her like she was a child. "You're not alone," Eleanor whispered. "You're not alone anymore." But Ava felt more alone than ever. The final blow came that night. Ava went out to throw away trash and found her apartment door had been vandalized. Someone had taken a knife and carved deep grooves into the wood. The word "stay" was carved near the top. Below it, out, her mailbox had been ripped partially off the wall. Inside, her mail had been torn to shreds. And worst of all, the deadbolt on her door had been damaged. It's still locked, barely, but it wouldn't hold against any serious force. Ava knew immediately who had done it. Greg was escalating. He'd already cost her her job, nearly gotten her child taken away, and now he was directly threatening her safety. The message was clear: back off or things will get worse. Mrs. Patel came over as soon as Ava called her. She took one look at the door and made a decision. "You can't stay here. None of you can. It's not safe. Where would we go?" Ava asked. "There's a women's shelter downtown. St. Catherine's. They have private rooms. Security. Cameras. I volunteer there sometimes. I can get you in tonight." Ava looked at her door, at the carved threats, at the broken mailbox. She looked at Micah sleeping peacefully in his crib, completely unaware of the danger surrounding him. She thought about Walter's heart condition and Eleanor's constant fear. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we'll go." They packed quickly. Everything Ava owned fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. Eleanor and Walter had even less. By 11 that night, they were checking into St. Catherine's shelter, being processed by a kind intake coordinator who didn't ask too many questions. The room was small but clean. 2 beds, a crib that the shelter provided, a bathroom with a lock. Most importantly, it had a security door that required a code to enter. The coordinator explained that they logged everyone who came and went. No one could get in without permission. For the first time in days, Ava felt like she could breathe. But that night, lying in the unfamiliar bed with Micah beside her and Eleanor and Walter in the other bed, Ava made a decision. She was done running. She was done being scared. Greg had taken her job, threatened her home, and tried to turn the system against her. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd given them time to gather evidence. And Ava was going to use that evidence to bring him down. She just needed to figure out how. The next morning, while Eleanor and Walter were eating breakfast in the shelter's common room, Ava was going through the metal box again. She laid out every document, every note, every piece of paper that proved Greg's crimes. She photographed everything and uploaded it to a cloud storage account, making sure there were backups. Then she found something she'd missed before. A small piece of paper tucked in the back of the box, folded so many times it was barely readable. She unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten note from Greg's lawyer. The handwriting was rushed, like someone taking notes during a phone call. It said, Client requests information on declaring parents mentally incompetent. Wants full conservatorship. Asked about timeline and costs. Advised and process takes 3 to 6 months with proper documentation. He seemed impatient. Kept asking about faster options. Ava's hands started shaking. This wasn't just evidence of financial fraud. This was evidence of a planned conspiracy to strip Walter and Eleanor of their legal rights. This was Greg actively working with a lawyer to have his parents declared incompetent, so he could control every aspect of their lives. This was the smoking gun they needed. Ava grabbed her phone and called Mrs. Patel. I found something big. We need to find a lawyer. A real lawyer who specializes in this kind of thing. I'll make some calls, Mrs. Patel said. I know someone at Legal Aid. Let me see what I can do. By that afternoon, they had an appointment with Ms. Daniels, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 50s who specialized in elder abuse cases. She listened to their story without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with every detail. When they showed her the documents, especially the lawyer's note, she sat back in her chair and nodded slowly. This is one of the worst cases I've seen, she said. And I've seen a lot. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I'd like to represent you pro bono. We're going to stop your son, and then we're going to make sure he faces consequences for what he's done. For the first time since that night at the bus stop, Ava felt something that might have been hope. With Ms. Daniels on their side, everything started moving fast. The lawyer took one look at the handwritten note from Greg's attorney and immediately recognized what they were dealing with. She sat across from Ava, Eleanor, and Walter in her cramped legal aid office, her desk covered with their documents, and explained exactly what that note meant. This isn't just elder abuse anymore, Ms. Daniels said, tapping the note with her pen. This is evidence of conspiracy. Greg was actively planning to have you declared mentally incompetent, which would have given him complete control over your lives. Your money, your medical decisions, where you live, everything. And based on this timeline he wrote, he was planning to do it within the next few months. Walter's face had gone ashen. But we're not incompetent. We're fine. A little forgetful sometimes, but fine. It doesn't matter, Ms. Daniels said grimly. If he'd gotten a cooperative doctor to sign off on an evaluation, if he'd presented the right evidence to a judge, he could have made it happen, especially since he already had power of attorney over your finances. The system assumes family members have their elderly relatives' best interests at heart. It doesn't always catch the ones who don't. Eleanor had started crying again, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks. Ava reached over and squeezed her hand. So what do we do? Ava asked. We build a timeline, Ms. Daniels said. We document everything. Every withdrawal, every conversation, every time Greg exhibited controlling or abusive behavior. We need dates, amounts, witnesses. The more specific we can be, the stronger our case. Over the next 3 days, they worked. Eleanor's memory was shakier than Walter's, the stress and fear having taken their toll. She would start to tell a story about something Greg had done, then forget the details halfway through. Walter was better with dates, but got confused about amounts and specific conversations. Ava helped them piece it together, writing everything down, cross-referencing bank statements with Eleanor's scattered memories. They discovered patterns they hadn't seen before. Greg always visited on Sundays. He always brought takeout, which seemed kind until they realized it was his way of making sure they were home and couldn't refuse to see him. He always asked to use Walter's computer, claiming his laptop was broken, but now they realized he'd been accessing their accounts and transferring money while they sat in the next room watching television. He made me feel stupid, Eleanor said one afternoon, her voice small. Every time I asked a question about the money, he'd sigh and explain it like I was a child. Eventually, I stopped asking because I didn't want him to think I was losing my mind. That's what abusers do, Ms. Daniels said gently. They make you doubt yourself. They isolate you. They make you think you're the problem. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. The hospital worker who'd sent Ava that first warning message reached out again. Her name was Patricia, and she was a nurse who'd worked at County General for 15 years. She asked to meet Ava in person, somewhere private. They met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the shelter. Patricia was a heavy-set black woman in her 50s with tired eyes and nervous hands. She stirred her coffee over and over without drinking it. I could lose my job for this, Patricia said, but I can't stay quiet anymore. What Greg Hayes did to you, filing that false report about stolen medication, that's exactly what he tried to do to us months ago. What do you mean? Back in September, he brought his parents to the emergency room, said his mother had fallen and hit her head. But when I examined her, there were no signs of a fall. No bumps, no bruises in the right places. The injuries looked more like someone had grabbed her roughly and shaken her. Ava felt sick. Did you report it? I tried. I filed a report with my supervisor. But Greg was so smooth, so convincing. He said his mother had dementia, that she bruised easily, that she'd fallen multiple times that week. He had answers for everything. And then he started making complaints about me. Said I was rude to him. Said I'd given his mother the wrong medication. None of it was true, but suddenly I was under investigation. What happened? Eventually they cleared me because there was no evidence. But it took weeks and it was terrifying. I have 3 kids. I can't lose this job. So when I saw him filing that same kind of false report against you, I knew I had to say something. He's done this before. He'll do it again. Someone needs to stop him. Patricia agreed to provide a written statement detailing everything she'd witnessed. She also revealed something Ava hadn't known. Greg had requested sedatives for his parents months earlier, claiming they had severe anxiety. He'd asked for doses that Patricia thought were far too strong for elderly patients. When she questioned it, he'd gotten angry and demanded a different nurse. If we'd given him those sedatives at the doses he wanted, Patricia said, it could have been dangerous, especially for someone Walter's age with heart problems. It could have caused respiratory distress or worse. Ms. Daniels added Patricia's statement to their growing file of evidence. She also filed several legal motions, an emergency restraining order to keep Greg away from his parents, a request for temporary guardianship protections, a formal elder abuse complaint, and a motion to investigate the property transfer for fraud. This is going to get his attention, Ms. Daniels warned. Once he's served with these papers, he's going to know you're serious. He's going to fight back hard. She was right. 2 days later, a judge granted an emergency hearing. Everyone would have to appear in court. Ava, Eleanor, Walter, Greg, and anyone else with relevant testimony. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Greg's response came the next day. He filed a counter-motion claiming his parents were mentally unstable and that Ava had manipulated them for financial gain. He provided statements from neighbors saying Eleanor sometimes forgot their names. He included medical records showing Walter's prescriptions for blood pressure medication, implying cognitive decline. He even found a doctor willing to say that elderly patients often become confused and suggestible. But Greg made a mistake. He got desperate. 3 days before the hearing, Ava was walking back to the shelter from the grocery store when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Greg standing 10 feet away. "We need to talk," he said. Ava's heart started racing. She looked around, but the street was mostly empty. It was dusk, that weird time when it wasn't quite dark, but all the shops were closing. "Stay away from me," Ava said, her voice shaking. "I just want to talk. You don't understand what you're doing. Those are my parents. Mine. I've been taking care of them for years. By stealing their money? By hurting them." Greg took a step closer. "You don't know anything about our family. You're some broke single mother who saw an opportunity and took it. Well, guess what? People like you don't win against people like me. I have money. I have lawyers. I'll bury you." Ava pulled out her phone. "I'm recording this conversation." Greg's face twisted with rage. He lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "You think you're smart? You think recording me will help? Let go of me." A car pulled up to the curb. A courthouse marshal got out, someone Ava recognized from her previous visit. He'd been watching from across the street. "Sir, step back from her. Now." Greg released Ava's wrist and backed away, his face going pale. "I wasn't doing anything. We were just talking. I saw you grab her. Miss Thompson, are you all right?" Ava nodded, rubbing her wrist. "He threatened me. He said he'd bury me." The marshal took notes, documenting everything. Greg tried to argue, tried to explain, but the marshal cut him off. "Sir, there's a hearing scheduled. I suggest you save it for the judge. And I'm logging this encounter as harassment. If you come near Ms. Thompson again before that hearing, you'll be arrested." Greg left, but not before shooting Ava a look of pure hatred. As soon as he was gone, Ava collapsed against the marshal's car, shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. "Go straight back to wherever you're staying," the marshal said. "And don't go anywhere alone until after that hearing. This guy's dangerous." The night before the hearing, nobody at the shelter slept. Eleanor kept getting up to use the bathroom, her nerves making her stomach upset. Walter lay awake staring at the ceiling, occasionally clutching his chest. Ava held Micah and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. At 8 in the morning, they all dressed in the nicest clothes they had. For Ava, that meant the black pants and white shirt she used to wear to job interviews. For Eleanor and Walter, it meant the same clothes they'd been wearing the night Ava found them, now washed and pressed as best as possible. Ms. Daniels met them at the courthouse. She looked calm and professional in a Navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase full of documents. "Remember," she said, "stay calm. Answer questions directly. Don't let Greg or his lawyer rattle you. We have the truth on our side." Inside the courtroom, Greg was already seated with his attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Greg looked confident, almost smug. He smiled at the judge when they entered, playing the role of the concerned son perfectly. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Patterson. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that made Ava feel slightly less terrified. "This is an emergency hearing regarding the Hayes family matter," Judge Patterson said. "Mr. Hayes, you're claiming your parents have been kidnapped and manipulated. Ms. Daniels, you're claiming elder abuse and financial exploitation. Let's start with Mr. Hayes." Greg's lawyer stood up and painted a picture of a loving son trying to care for aging parents who were becoming increasingly confused. He talked about how Eleanor forgot appointments and how Walter's medication sometimes made him disoriented. He suggested. Then it was Ms. Daniels' turn. She stood and addressed the judge with quiet authority, laying out the timeline of Greg's abuse step by step. She presented bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. She showed the forged property transfer. She read from the lawyer's note about mental incompetency proceedings. "Your Honor," Ms. Daniels said, "this isn't a case of a concerned son helping his parents. This is a case of systematic exploitation and abuse. And we have evidence to prove it." Greg's smug expression started to crack. His lawyer objected several times, but Judge Patterson overruled him, clearly interested in what Ms. Daniels had to say. Then came the recording. Ms. Daniels played Ava's phone recording of Greg threatening her through the apartment door. The courtroom went completely silent as Greg's voice echoed through the speakers. "You'll regret inserting yourself into our family. You think you're a hero? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The judge's expression hardened. She looked at Greg with narrowed eyes. "Mr. Hayes, is that your voice on that recording?" Greg's face had gone red. "I was upset. She had my parents. I just wanted them back. That sounded like a threat to me. It wasn't meant that way." Ms. Daniels then called Ava to testify. Ava walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, her mouth dry. She swore to tell the truth and sat down, very aware of Greg's eyes boring into her. Ms. Daniels asked her to explain how she'd met Eleanor and Walter. Ava told the story simply and honestly, starting with missing the bus and hearing Eleanor crying at the shelter. She described their condition: cold, hungry, terrified, abandoned. She explained how she'd given them her last $20 and her bus pass, how she'd taken them home because leaving them there felt wrong. "Ms. Thompson," Ms. Daniels said, "you're a single mother working a minimum wage job. Why would you help complete strangers when you barely had enough for yourself?" Ava looked at Eleanor and Walter sitting in the gallery. Because they needed help. Because nobody else was helping them. Because it was the right thing to do. Greg's lawyer tried to discredit her during cross-examination, suggesting she'd help them hoping for a financial reward. Ava shook her head. "I never asked them for money. I never wanted anything except to keep them safe." Then Eleanor testified. She walked slowly to the stand, her hands trembling so badly she could barely place them on the Bible to swear in. When she sat down, she looked tiny and fragile in the big chair. Ms. Daniels asked her gently, "Mrs. Hayes, can you tell the court what happened the night you met Miss Thompson?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper at first. The judge had to ask her to speak up. She cleared her throat and started again, louder this time, but shaking. My son drove us to that bus stop. He said we needed to run errands. He said he'd be right back, but he didn't come back. We waited for hours. It was so cold. I thought we were going to die there. Did your son say why he was leaving you there? No, he just said to wait. And then he drove away. Mrs. Hayes, has your son ever hurt you or your husband? Eleanor looked at Greg. He was staring at her intensely, his jaw clenched. She started to shake her head, then stopped. Something changed in her face. After 60 years of protecting people, of keeping quiet, of making excuses, Eleanor made a choice. Yes, she said, her voice stronger now. He hurts us. He grabbed Walter's arm so hard it left bruises. He yells at us when we ask questions about our money. He took our house without telling us. He made us sign papers we didn't understand. And when I tried to tell him I was scared, when I said I wanted to talk to our daughter, he said if we contacted her, he'd put us in a home where we'd never see daylight again. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Greg had gone pale. His lawyer was frantically writing notes. He's my son, Eleanor continued, tears streaming down her face. I love him, but he's hurt us. He's stolen from us. And that night at the bus stop, I think he left us there to die. I think he wanted us gone so he could have everything. Greg suddenly stood up. That's a lie. That's complete nonsense. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. Mr. Hayes, sit down, Judge Patterson said sharply. She has dementia. She forgets things. You can't believe her. Mr. Hayes, sit down now, or you'll be held in contempt. Greg's lawyer grabbed his arm and pulled him back into his seat, whispering urgently. Greg was breathing hard, his face twisted with rage. Walter testified next. He was calmer than Eleanor, his military background giving him a steadiness under pressure. He corroborated everything Eleanor had said. He showed the judge his arm, where the bruises had faded but were still faintly visible. He talked about the money disappearing, about the house being transferred, about Greg's increasing anger and control. I trusted my son, Walter said. I gave him power over our lives because I thought he loved us. I was wrong. Patricia, the hospital nurse, testified about Greg's behavior at the hospital, about the false complaints he'd filed, about his request for dangerous doses of sedatives. The courthouse marshal testified about witnessing Greg grab Ava's wrist and threaten her just days earlier. The evidence piled up, piece after piece, until Greg's lawyer could barely mount a defense. He tried to argue that everything was a misunderstanding, that Greg had made mistakes but had good intentions. But even he seemed to realize how weak it sounded. Finally, Judge Patterson called for a recess. Everyone filed out of the courtroom to wait while she reviewed the evidence. Ava sat on a bench in the hallway, Micah sleeping in her arms, feeling numb. After an hour, they were called back in. Judge Patterson looked at Greg with an expression of deep disappointment. Mr. Hayes, I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. The bank statements, the property transfer documents, the recordings, the testimony from multiple witnesses. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse and financial exploitation I've seen in my career. Greg started to stand, but his lawyer held him down. I'm granting the emergency restraining order, Judge Patterson continued. You're not to contact your parents in any way. No calls, no texts, no third-party messages. I'm also freezing all financial transactions related to any accounts or properties that were in your parents' names. The property transfer is under formal investigation for fraud, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges. Greg exploded. He jumped to his feet, shoving his lawyer aside. This is insane. They're my parents. That woman poisoned them against me. She's a nobody. She has nothing. And you're going to take her word over mine? Mr. Hayes, I have rights. I've taken care of them for years. That house is mine. The money is mine. The truth had finally come out, raw and ugly. Not that he loved his parents or wanted to protect them, but that he thought their assets belonged to him. Marshal, Judge Patterson said calmly, please escort Mr. Hayes from my courtroom. Two marshals moved toward Greg. He backed away, his face purple with rage. You're all going to regret this. I'll appeal. I'll fight this. You can't do this to me." They grabbed his arms and started pulling him toward the door. Greg twisted around to look at Ava one last time. "This is your fault," he screamed. "All of this. I'll make you pay. I swear to God, you'll pay for this." Then he was gone, his voice echoing down the hallway until a door slammed shut. The courtroom stayed quiet for a moment. Then Eleanor started sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs of relief and grief mixed together. Walter held her, his own tears falling silently. Ava felt like she couldn't breathe. It was over. The first battle, at least, was over. Judge Patterson looked at Eleanor and Walter with compassion. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I'm very sorry for what you've been through. I'm appointing a temporary guardian to help you sort through your finances and ensure your safety while the criminal case proceeds. Ms. Thompson, thank you for your courage in helping this couple. You likely saved their lives." Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Someone had heard about the case, and word had spread. They shouted questions at Ava and Ms. Daniels, at Eleanor and Walter. Ms. Daniels handled most of it, giving a brief statement about elder abuse and the importance of protecting vulnerable adults. But one reporter, a young woman with kind eyes, approached Ava directly. "Ms. Thompson, can I talk to you privately? I think your story needs to be told." Ava hesitated. Publicity meant attention. Attention could be dangerous, but could also mean help. It could mean other families recognizing the signs of abuse. It could mean change. "Okay," Ava said. "Let's talk." The interview with the reporter, Jessica Chun, happened 3 days after the courthouse hearing. They met at a quiet diner where Jessica recorded everything on her phone while Ava told the whole story from beginning to end. Jessica listened intently, occasionally asking questions, her expression growing more serious as the details unfolded. "This is bigger than just your story," Jessica said when Ava finished. "I've been investigating elder abuse cases for months. The patterns you're describing, they're not unique to Greg Hayes. There's a whole system of people preying on vulnerable seniors." "What do you mean?" Jessica pulled out a folder from her bag. "I've been tracking complaints against a real estate broker named Linda Lawton. Multiple families have accused her of pressuring elderly homeowners to sell their properties below market value. The sales always go through quickly, and the families are often pushed into care facilities right after." "Sound familiar?" Ava felt her stomach drop. "Greg's been working with someone?" "I think so. And if I can prove it, this becomes a conspiracy case, which means bigger charges, more attention, and potentially more victims coming forward." The article ran 2 days later. Jessica had worked fast, publishing a detailed piece in the city's largest newspaper with the headline, "Local Woman Saves Elderly Couple from Abusive Son's Scheme." The article included photos of Ava holding Micah, quotes from Eleanor and Walter, and a breakdown of everything Greg had done. It went viral within hours. Suddenly, Ava's phone wouldn't stop ringing. News stations wanted interviews. People from across the state were emailing her, some sharing their own stories of elder abuse, others offering donations and help. A local church collected baby supplies and delivered them to the shelter. Strangers sent money through online fundraisers. Within a week, Ava had received over $15,000 in donations. She cried when she saw the number. For the first time since Marcus left, since she'd become pregnant and alone and terrified, she felt like maybe things could be okay. Maybe she could provide for Micah. Maybe they'd survive this. But Jessica's investigation uncovered something even more disturbing. She found records showing Greg had been working with Linda Lawton for at least 2 years. Together, they targeted elderly homeowners across 3 counties. The pattern was always the same. A family member would gain financial control, the elderly person's home would be transferred to an LLC, and Lawton would arrange a quick sale for far more than the LLC paid. The profits would be split between the family member and Lawton, while the elderly victims were moved into facilities or simply disappeared from the system. "I found 8 other cases," Jessica told Ava over the phone. 8 other families who lost their homes the exact same way. Some of them didn't even realize they'd been robbed until it was too late. Their kids or relatives convinced them they were doing the right thing. That's horrible. It gets worse. I talked to the families. Several of them said their relatives tried to report concerns, but nothing happened. The system failed them, just like it almost failed Eleanor and Walter. Ms. Daniels took the information straight to the district attorney. With evidence of a wider conspiracy, the DA opened a full investigation into both Greg and Linda Lawton. Subpoenas were issued. Bank records were seized. The case that had started with Ava helping two strangers at a bus stop had become something much larger. Then Greg disappeared. When police went to serve him with additional charges, his apartment was empty. His truck was found abandoned near the river, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Some people speculated he'd committed suicide, jumping into the cold water to escape what was coming. But Ava knew better. Greg was too angry, too entitled to give up that easily. He was hiding, planning, waiting for his moment. Eleanor was terrified by the news. "He's going to come back," she whispered to Ava one night at the shelter. "He's going to come back and hurt us. I know he will. He can't get to you here," Ava reassured her, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "The shelter has security. Ms. Daniels got the restraining order extended. If he shows up anywhere near you, he'll be arrested." But 3 days after Greg disappeared, someone broke into the shelter. It happened at 2 in the morning when most residents were asleep. The person bypassed the security door somehow and made it all the way to the second-floor hallway before motion sensors triggered an alarm. Security responded within seconds, but the intruder was already running. They caught a glimpse of someone in dark clothes and a hood before he disappeared through a back exit. A glove was left behind in the hallway. Inside, it was a name written on the tag: G. Hayes. Eleanor had a panic attack that night. Walter's chest pains returned so severely they had to call an ambulance. The shelter coordinator decided they needed to be moved to an even more secure location, a private safe house used for domestic violence victims in extreme danger. Ava went with them, unwilling to leave them alone. The safe house was in a quiet suburb, a plain-looking home that could have belonged to anyone. But it had reinforced doors, security cameras on every angle, and a panic room in the basement. A police officer was stationed outside 24 hours a day. It should have felt safe, but Ava couldn't shake the feeling that Greg was watching somehow, waiting for them to let their guard down. Then Patricia called with information that changed everything. She'd been going through old hospital records, looking for anything that might help the case when she found something disturbing. Months before Eleanor and Walter were abandoned at the bus stop, Greg had brought his mother to the emergency room, claiming she'd overdosed on her anxiety medication. Patricia had been the attending nurse. "I remember now," Patricia said, her voice shaking. Eleanor was barely conscious. Greg said she'd gotten confused and taken too many pills. But something felt wrong about it. The way he kept insisting it was an accident. The way he wouldn't leave the room while we treated her. I filed a concern report, but nothing came of it. "You think he gave her the overdose?" Ava asked, horrified. "I think he was testing, seeing how far he could go, seeing if anyone would question him. When nothing happened, when everyone believed his story, he got bolder." Ms. Daniels added this to the growing list of charges: attempted harm, reckless endangerment, maybe even attempted murder, depending on how the DA wanted to pursue it. The case was building into something massive, but they still needed to find Greg. The break came from an unexpected source. One of Linda Lawton's former employees, guilty about what she'd witnessed, came forward with emails and text messages showing detailed communications between Greg and Lawton. They'd been planning the sale of Eleanor and Walter's house for months. The emails discussed moving the elderly couple into a facility permanently, with one message from Greg saying, "Once they're gone, we're looking at $500,000 profit, easy." When confronted with this evidence, Lawton tried to make a deal. She'd give up Greg's location in exchange for a reduced sentence. The DA agreed. Lawton revealed that Greg had been hiding in a motel outside the city, using a fake name and paying cash for everything. He'd been planning to flee to Mexico once he could arrange fake identification papers. Police raided the motel at dawn. Greg tried to run, actually jumped out a second-story window, and broke his ankle in the process. Officers tackled him in the parking lot while he screamed about persecution and injustice. In his room, they found fake IDs, packed bags with cash, and a notebook detailing his plans to disappear permanently. They also found something that made Ava's blood run cold, a detailed notebook with her daily schedule. What time she left the safe house, where she went, who she talked to. Greg had been watching her, stalking her, planning something. The last entry in the notebook simply said, "She ruined everything. She has to pay." When Ms. Daniels told Ava about the notebook, she felt physically sick. "He was going to hurt me." "Yes," Ms. Daniels said grimly. "Probably worse than hurt." "Ava, you need to understand something. You didn't just save Eleanor and Walter. You probably saved your own life by helping them. If you'd walked past that bus stop, if you'd ignored them, Greg would have succeeded. And then who knows what he would have done next." Greg was arrested and charged with elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, attempted harm, stalking, harassment, and attempted escape. His bail was set at $500,000, which he couldn't pay since all his assets were frozen. He'd be staying in jail until trial. The day Greg was arrested, Eleanor cried for hours. Not sad tears, but relieved ones. "It's really over," she kept saying. "He can't hurt us anymore." The trial took 3 months to prepare, but when it finally happened, it was fast. The evidence was overwhelming. Greg's own notebook, his emails with Lawton, the forged documents, the testimony from multiple witnesses, including Ava, Eleanor, Walter, Patricia, and even some of Lawton's other victims. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. Greg was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Linda Lawton received 10 years. The judge also ordered restitution, though Greg had spent most of his stolen money by then. Still, what little remained would go back to Eleanor and Walter. More importantly, the property transfer was officially declared fraudulent. The house was legally returned to Eleanor and Walter Hayes. It was their home again, free and clear, just as it had been before Greg's scheme began. The day the verdict came down, Ava sat in the courtroom holding Micah and watching Greg be led away in handcuffs. He turned back one last time, his eyes finding hers across the room. But there was no rage anymore, just defeat, just the hollow realization that he destroyed his life for money he'd never get to spend. County General Hospital, embarrassed by how they'd treated Ava, called and offered her job back with back pay and a formal apology. But Ava surprised herself by saying no. During the months of helping Eleanor and Walter, she discovered something about herself. She was good at this, good at seeing when people needed help, good at navigating complicated systems, good at fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. A nonprofit called Safe Aging reached out to her. They worked with vulnerable seniors and families dealing with abuse. They offered Ava a full-time position as a family advocate, helping other people in situations like Eleanor and Walter's. The salary was better than the hospital, and the work felt meaningful in a way mopping floors never had. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked when Ava told them. "It's going to be hard work, dealing with situations like ours all the time." "I'm sure," Ava said. "Someone helped me when I needed it. My grandmother when my mother left. The nurses at the free clinic when I was pregnant and alone. The coworker who gave us a ride that first night. Everyone who donated money after the article ran. I've been helped my whole life by people who didn't have to help. Now it's my turn." Eleanor smiled through tears. Your grandmother would be proud. The community response had been overwhelming. Not just donations, but actual support. A local landlord offered Ava a 2-bedroom apartment at reduced rent. A daycare center gave her a scholarship spot for Micah. People she'd never met sent cards and gifts and messages of encouragement. For the first time in her adult life, Ava felt like she belonged to something bigger than herself. But the biggest surprise came from Eleanor and Walter themselves. One afternoon, Walter asked to speak with Ava privately. They sat in the living room of the safe house, while Eleanor watched Micah in the next room, making silly faces that had the baby giggling. "Ava," Walter said, his voice serious, "Eleanor and I have been talking about everything you've done for us, about how you risked your job, your home, your safety to help 2 strangers. We can never truly repay you for that. You don't need to repay me. Please let me finish." Walter pulled out a document from his pocket. "We've been working with Ms. Daniels on updating our estate planning. making sure everything is in order so nothing like this can happen again. And we wanted to do something for you. He handed her the paper. Ava looked at it, confused at first. Then she realized what she was reading. It was a beneficiary designation form for a pension account Walter had maintained throughout his retirement. Her name was listed as the sole beneficiary. "Walter, I can't accept this." "It's not much," Walter said. "Maybe $50,000 when I die. But it's something. And more than money, it's a promise. You gave us our lives back. This is us making sure you and Micah have security. That you never have to choose between feeding your baby and helping someone in need." Ava started crying. "This is too much." Eleanor came in from the other room, still holding Micah. "It's not too much. It's not even close to enough. Ava, you're family now. You're the daughter who answered when we needed her. And family takes care of each other." Over the following months, everything slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Eleanor and Walter's house was professionally cleaned and repaired. Volunteers from Safe Aging and local churches helped remove all traces of Greg, all the reminders of what he'd done. They painted walls, fixed broken cabinets, replaced locks. When Eleanor walked through the front door for the first time in months, she burst into tears. "It feels like home again," she whispered. They invited Ava to live in their spare bedroom until she got on her feet, but Ava declined. She loved her new apartment, small as it was. It was hers. She'd earned it. But she visited Eleanor and Walter almost every day, bringing Micah with her. Eleanor had become his honorary grandmother, teaching him to smile and laugh, reading him stories even though he was too young to understand them. Walter built a vegetable garden in the backyard and insisted on bringing Ava fresh tomatoes and zucchini every week. He also started attending a support group for elder abuse survivors, something Ms. Daniels had recommended. Slowly, the fear in his eyes faded. The man who'd been broken and terrified at that bus stop was becoming himself again. One evening, 6 months after everything began, Ava stood at the same bus stop where she'd first met Eleanor and Walter. She was waiting for the bus after visiting them. Micah strapped to her chest in a carrier, warm and content. The November air was cold, just like it had been that night, but Ava didn't feel the same bone-deep exhaustion she'd felt back then. She felt strong. She felt capable. She felt like herself. A woman approached the bus stop, probably in her 60s, carrying heavy grocery bags and looking overwhelmed. She set the bags down with a tired sigh and rubbed her shoulder, wincing. "Are you all right?" Ava asked. The woman looked up, surprised. "Oh, just tired. These bags are heavier than I expected, and my daughter was supposed to pick me up, but her car broke down. I'm trying to figure out which bus gets me closest to home." Ava looked at the woman's tired face, her heavy bags, her obvious struggle. She thought about that night 6 months ago when she almost walked past this very bus stop without looking back. She thought about how one decision, one moment of choosing to help instead of walking away, had changed everything. "Where do you live?" Ava asked. "Maybe I can help you figure out the route." The woman's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Thank you. That's so kind." As Ava helped the woman plan her route and even helped carry her bags to the right bus stop, Micah cooed contentedly against her chest. Ava smiled. This was who she was now. Not someone who walked past people in need. Not someone too scared or too broke or too tired to care. She was someone who stopped, who helped, who made a difference. That night at the bus stop hadn't just saved Eleanor and Walter. It had transformed Ava into the person she was always meant to be. And as she watched the woman board her bus with a wave of thanks, as she felt Micah's warmth against her heart, Ava understood something profound. We save ourselves by saving others. We find family in the people we choose to help. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply refusing to walk past someone who needs us. The bus arrived, and Ava climbed aboard with Micah. Through the window, she saw the woman she'd just helped texting someone, probably her daughter, telling her she'd made it. One small act of kindness creating ripples of relief and gratitude. Ava smiled and held Micah closer. They were going to be okay. Better than okay. They were going to thrive. And along the way, they'd help other people thrive too. Because that's what families do. And family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people you find at a bus stop on a cold November night, when you're both exactly where you need to be. If you saw someone desperate and alone in the cold tonight, would you have the courage to stop, even if helping them might cost you everything? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things.